evening, everyone, and welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. I'm very, very pleased to be here. Grateful to John Rowe for having invited me, and to Mike and the team for just setting the whole thing up and keeping it running. And what a wonderful opportunity at these very difficult times to reach out and to feel connected and like a community, which we are, of course. So my name is Suzanne Arnold, or Suzanne the Storyweaver, as some people know me. I am the founder and host of the Tales and Ales Storytelling Nights at the Locks Inn, and it's a bit like how I'm viewing this is that Tales and Ales comes to the storytelling, the World Storytelling Cafe. So if we were there, and let me just share with you, it's a very beautiful, beautiful place. The Locks Inn is a pub that is on the river, on the marshes, and it's right on the border between Suffolk and Norfolk in the UK. It's a very magical place. We sometimes in the summer we'll sit outside around a fire, and there's the mist on the marshes and the sound of the swans as they fly past and the owls, and it's very, very magical. And we have a very loyal, brilliant audience. So if we were there, we would start with a song. So I'm going to sing it, and hopefully, if any of you are out there, hello, lovely people, and join in like they always do when we sing it at the locks. So, are you ready? So imagine the hubbub is going on around, the pub is full of people chatting, and I go, come, and slowly but surely everybody joins in. Come, lend me your ears, and I'll tell you a tale of a place far away and long ago. Come journey with me, and we'll see what we see in a place far away and long ago. Once upon a time, there was a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, and they had been together, well, I don't know how long they'd been together, but like some couples who have been together for a while, they bickered, and they bickered all day long. Maybe they didn't even know that they did it, but they did. The wife would get up in the morning, and she would clean the floor and clean out the fire. She'd set the fire and light the fire and put the water on to boil and make the food and do the washing and hang the washing out. While her husband, he would sit out on the bench next to the door and smoke his pipe and watch the world go by. Well, I'm sure you can imagine that this irked her somewhat, and that was responsible for some of the bickering. And so it went on. And one day she had been so busy when suddenly she could hear the calf still in the barn, unfed, unwatered, desperate. Now normally she would go and do it, but she called out to her husband, "Husband, go and feed the calf in the barn. He is thirsty, he is hungry. You are doing nothing." He said, "I am not doing nothing." She said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I am thinking deep thoughts." She said, "Ha! Deep thoughts? Your thoughts are as long as a pig's tail is deep as a pig's tail is short." "Woman," he said, "you are here to obey me. I am here to make sure that you obey me. Now get on with your work." And she said, "How dare you? You go and get some work like every other husband in this village." He said, "I do not need to get work." "Oh, what makes you so special?" He looked at her and he said, I inherited a flock of sheep from my father, which you well know. A shepherd looks after the sheep, and we grow fat on the wool and on the milk and the cheese, so I provide for you. Ha! She said. You provide nothing but misery. And so it went on. Well, at the end of the day, the two of them had really had enough of each other. And the argument was still about whose job it was to feed and to water the calf. It seemed that they both came to the same idea at the same time, because before bedtime they looked at each other and said, I have an idea. I have an idea too. Well, this is my idea, that from now on we do not speak. And the first person that speaks from this silence is the one that is responsible for the calf. Ha! That was my idea too. From this time on. Now. 1, 2, 3. And so it was. They went to bed in silence. They got up in silence. And the woman, she went about her chores. She swept the floor. She cleaned the fire. She set the fire. She lit the fire. She put the water on. She made the food. She did the breakfast. She washed the clothes. She hung them out. And during this whole time, her husband had sat outside on the bench, smoking his pipe. She thought, I have had enough. I am going to have to go out, because I know I will not be able to keep my mouth shut if I do not. So she took her shawl, she put it round her shoulders, and she walked out the door past her husband. He was about to say, Where are you going, wife? When he remembered, and he kept quiet. And he watched as she walked down the village into the square. Ha! And then he sat quietly, contemplating his life. When down the road there came a beggar. And the beggar, seeing the man sitting outside, approached him and said, Please, please, sir, I am so hungry. Have you got some food and something to drink for me? Well, the husband was about to say, Clear off, when he suddenly had a thought. What if my wife has put him up to this? So he didn't say anything. And the beggar said, Oh, please, sir. And then he thought, Oh, are you deaf? Still no answer. Oh, well, perhaps you're mute as well. Oh, well, in that case. And he walked past the husband and into the house, went into the larder and helped himself to food and drink. And then he filled his pockets with what he could find and what he could carry. Out he went, past the husband, waved at him as he passed. Off down the road. Well, the husband was fuming. How could his wife do this to him? And whilst he sat and contemplated this, somebody else came down the road. This time it was a travelling barber. Seeing the man sitting outside on the bench, he approached him and said, Oh, sir, can I give your beard a trim? Can I cut your hair for you? The husband just stared at him. Oh, can you not hear me? Nothing. Oh, maybe you are deaf and mute. Ha! I will give you a trim anyway. And he took out his scissors and he trimmed the husband's beard and did his hair. And then he put his hand out for some money. The husband just looked at him and shook his head. And the man was so cross. The barber said, if you don't give me any money, he said, I will shave all of your beard off and I will cut your hair so that you look like a woman. The husband just stared at him. And so the barber set to work. He shaved the man's beard off and then he curled his hair around his temples. and he went huffily off down the road. The husband was fuming. He couldn't believe that his wife could be so conniving. As he sat and contemplated this, you guessed it, somebody else came down the road. It was a busy morning. There was an old woman who was bent over with a pack on her back and a tray at the front. And in that tray she had cosmetics. She had lipstick and rouge. She had bows and grips and clips for hair. She had wigs. She had everything that a woman would want for her beauty routine. But the old woman was also very poor of sight. And as she approached the house, she thought she saw a woman sitting on the bench. Oh, this poor woman. What does she look like? Oh, she's so ugly. I'll go and ask her if she wants me to help her. So she approached the husband and said, "Oh, my dear, why are you sitting out here by yourself? Oh, here, look at my tray. Maybe I could make you up today." The husband said nothing. Unbelievable is what was going on in his head. "Oh," she said, "are you deaf?" Still nothing. "Oh no, mute as well. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll just give you a little makeover." And so she set about applying rouge on the cheeks and lipstick and her eyebrows and her eyes, doing her hair, and decided that she could do nothing with the hair. So she took a wig out of her tray and put it on. "Oh, you look fabulous," she said. Put her hand out for some money. The husband just looked. So she reached her hand inside of his coat and took what coins she could. She spat on them and put them into her tray and went off down the road. The husband just was, well, he was incandescent with rage by now. But he didn't have long to think about it, because somebody else was coming down the road. A thief was coming down the road. He stopped and said, "Oh, young woman, what are you doing sitting out here on this bench in the middle of the day? Oh, are you okay? Are you deaf?" The husband just looked. "Oh dear, can't you speak either? Oh dear. Never mind." And the thief just walked past the husband and on into the house. There he took a sheet off the bed and he took all that he could, from candlesticks and goblets to knives. He took food from the pantry, bread and ale and cheese, and he piled them all into this cloth. And he did it up. He put it over his back and he walked out past the husband. The husband could not believe the lengths that his wife would go to break this bet. And he sat there quietly fuming. Well, by this time it was midday and the calf was still in the barn, lowing and mooing. It was so thirsty and so hungry, it broke its halter and it escaped from the barn. It ran down into the village and caused a hullabaloo, a real commotion. The wife, in with her friend, heard this commotion, and the two of them rushed outside. She saw that it was her calf. She went over, she grabbed it by the halter, and she started to walk back to her house. Well, she couldn't believe it. As she started to approach, she could see the bench outside her house, and on it there was another woman. Well, I've been gone no more than an hour, and he's already got another woman in place. She was fuming. She took the calf, she went up to this woman and she said, "Who are you?" And the husband went, "Ha! You lose. You look after the calf." "What?" And she looked at this figure that she'd thought was a woman, and it was indeed her husband, but made up with a wig and makeup, his beard gone. She said, "What?" And he said, "You sent all these people along to me to make me speak. Well, you failed. You see, all of this." She said, "I have sent no one along." "Oh, don't deny it," he said. "Who?" She said, "You sent a beggar. You sent a barber who did this to me. You sent the woman who put all this on. And then finally you sent somebody pretending to be a thief." "A thief?" She walked past her husband into the house and she looked around. All her precious things were gone. Everything was gone. She looked in the larder, the food, the ale. She went out and she said, "I do not believe you. You are a fool. You have given up your dignity and everything that we own, all for the sake of this ridiculous bet." She said, "You're right. I will feed the calf from now on." She said, "Because I'm leaving you and I'm taking it with me." And with that, she turned on her heels and she left. She walked into the middle of the square and she saw some children and she said to them, "Have you seen a man with a big bag or a pack over his back?" And they said, "Yes, somebody walked past and he went that way. He headed towards the trees over there." She said, "Thank you." She put her shawl around her shoulders and with the calf she set off, not knowing what she was going to say. And as she set off and she got towards the woods, the sun was beginning to set. What was she going to say? Here it was in the dark, but she was so angry with her husband. She knew that she'd think of something. She went into the woods and she started to walk through as the light was fading. And she could see the beginnings of a fire somewhere somewhere in there amongst the trees. And when she started almost to the point where she was there, she started to sob. The thief, the man at the fire, looked around. Couldn't see anything because it was too dark. "Who's there? Who's there?" "Oh, it's me. It's a woman. Can I come and share your fire, please? I'm lost and alone." He said, "Come, approach." And she went up to him. And he said, "Why are you here alone?" And she said, "Yes, it's just me and my calf." "Well, what are you doing here? What are you doing here by yourself?" And she said, "Oh, I have run away. I was working for a terrible, terrible taskmaster who used to beat me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. And I knew that one day I would end up dead because of him. So I decided to run away. And I took this calf with me. But now I find myself alone. And I'm so afeared. I'm so frightened of being alone that I may well go back to him." The thief said, "Come, come. Come and sit down next to the fire and tell me your full story." And so she sat, and she told him what her life had been like, and the thief just sucked it all up. And he looked at her and he said, "Don't go back." He said, "I'm a thief, and it can be a lonely life. So perhaps the two of us could work together. Do you think that might work?" And she said, "Oh, it might. And he said, "So dry your tears. Come on, let's toast it. I have some fine ale here, I'm sure." And he took her ale out of the bundle and poured her glasses, her goblets, out and filled them. She pretended to drink hers while he knocked his back. And then for the next couple of hours, she sat and listened to him and made sure that his glass was full all of the time. And before long, he was so drunk, he just fell asleep. And once she was certain that he was asleep, she took off his shoes. She took off his trousers. She took off his top. She took everything off. And she bundled it all up in the things that he'd stolen from her and left him naked by the fire. By the time she got back to the cottage, the sun was coming up. But where was her husband? His familiar figure was not on the bench. She went into the kitchen. The floor had been swept. The fire had been lit. There was water boiling. There was food cooked. But where was he? She went into the garden expecting the worst. And there was her husband hanging up the washing. She looked at him and said, "Stop! That's woman's work!" He turned and he looked at her sheepishly, and they laughed. And he said, "No, it's not." And she said, "It is. It's woman's work. Give it to me." And she went to take over. And then they heard the calf. And he said, "I'll go and do the calf." And she said, "No, that..." And they laughed. And from that day on, well, they sorted things out in a way that they never had before. She still did her chores around the house, but he got a job. And at night, when he was home and she had finished her day's chores, they would sit out on the bench together. And that's the story of the stubborn wife and the stubborn husband. Originally from Persia, I think, that one. Made its way all the way over here to the UK. So, I think that I was going to tell you, it's funny doing this, as I'm sure you've heard from many of the other storytellers. It's a funny old business not having an audience. So I think that I'm going to tell you another one. I use both of these from my set, which is about older women, actually, older women in folk tales. And this one, well, here we go. Long ago there was a king, and this king, well, he was considered to be a fine and fair king. And at the end of the day, he liked nothing better. After a hard day's reigning, he liked nothing better than to sit on the balcony, overlooking the street, overlooking the town, the city, and just to have a glass in one hand and to listen as his subjects walked along the road beneath him, and just to watch, to see who they were and what they were doing. Well, one evening, whilst he was sitting there, the sun gently setting, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a movement. And he looked down. And there was the strangest woman he'd ever seen in his life, he decided. She was very short, very old, with a crooked back, and it was almost like she was hovering above the ground. Well, he thought she was possibly the ugliest old crone he'd ever seen in his life, and he decided it was his job to tell her. So he started to shout over the balcony at this poor woman as she was minding her own business walking along. "Old crone, God, you're ugly. Which stone did you crawl out from under?" All the way along. And at one point, she just turned and she looked at him and then carried on. Well, it It became a bit of a sport for him at this time of night. He would wait eagerly to see if she would come along. And whenever she did, he would heckle her, he would catcall her, he would just shout the most horrendous things. Crone, hag, dried out old bag, you name it, he called her it. Until finally she broke. And one night she turned around and she pointed her bony finger up at him and she said, "You will be sorry for this. You will pay for this." And she turned on her heels and she was gone. Well, the king felt a strange sort of iciness, a chill start right in the core of his body that he couldn't explain, and he certainly wasn't about to tell anybody about it. But he began to wish that he hadn't been quite so cruel. Well, he didn't see her for a few days. And he didn't know that this old woman was actually a witch. She was a witch, she was a great healer. But she also knew magic that could change things. And she had gone home that night, and she was fed up to the back teeth with the way that the king, for no reason at all, was treating her. So she sat and she thought about how she could get her own back on him. And she came up with a plan. So the very next day, she went in to the town and in to see and have an audience with the Queen. The Queen was a beautiful young woman who was kind of heart and fair of skin, and the people loved her. The king, they were always a little bit scared of, but the Queen was lovely, and every day she would hold an audience for those that needed to see her. Now the old woman had changed herself into the form of a young woman. So when she went before the Queen, she said to the Queen, "Oh, Your Majesty, I hope that you will be able to help me, for I am just a poor, poor woman with 2 young children, no job and no money to put food in their mouths." Well, the Queen felt sorry for her, and she said, "Oh, my dear," she said, come tomorrow. She said, "and you can become my bath assistant, and I will pay you for that. Come and find me tomorrow." So the old witch disappeared, and the next day she came back, and true to her word, the Queen said, "Follow me." And she took her down into the bath chamber, and she explained to the woman what she needed to do, and the woman got her bath ready with fine oils and hot water, and then the Queen sat in the bath, and she gave a comb to the old woman to comb her, to the young woman to comb her hair. But as soon as that comb touched the Queen's hair, so she felt a strange sensation run through her body, and when she looked down at her hands, she could see that her skin had gone all coarse and hairy, and it was coming all the way up over her body. She could see at the corner of out of her eyes that she had hairs sprouting out of her cheeks. She screamed, and she turned around, but the woman was gone. And she screamed until the maids came running, and they went and fetched the king. And the king came. And if it hadn't been for the beautiful eyes, the eyes of his queen, he would not have recognized her. She told him what had happened. And she said, "Please, please find this woman." Well, the king was beside himself. She was a young woman. How was he supposed to find her? There were many, many young women in the whole of the city. So he sent his guards out to find this woman. and he paced up and down on his balcony, looking all the time in case she should come down on the road below. The old woman had gone home, and she didn't feel good about what she'd done. She felt decidedly bad about it, actually, because, after all, it wasn't the Queen's fault. The Queen was fair and pure of heart. But the King, he was the one that had called her names. He was the one that had mocked her. And so bad did she feel about it that she decided that she would go in and she would reverse the spell. So she went into the castle, into the palace, the castle, but the guards would not let her in. They said that nobody was allowed in or out, that they were searching the place for this young woman that had put this terrible spell onto the Queen. And the old woman was arguing with them, saying, "Let me in, I know about this." And the King, he heard, and he looked across at the guardhouse and he could see the old woman, and he shouted to the guards, "Let her in!" And the old woman was taken up to the King. And he said, "Is this your doing?" And she said, "Yes, it is my doing. In response to you, to your cruel words. Why did you mock me?" The King just looked at her and he said, "Change her back." And the old woman said, "I will change her back. But I will change her back because of her, not because of you. You are a cruel, hard man. You do not deserve a loving wife like that. Why would you? What gives you the right to be so cruel and to mock me? I am old, yes, I am wise. I do not deserve to be mocked. Now I will only change her back if you change your ways." Well, the King knew that he had no choice. He had no defense against this woman. He wanted his Queen back. So he agreed. And the old woman was taken to the Queen. And before she did anything, she bent her head low, put her hand on her heart, and she said, "I am so sorry that you were the one that paid for your husband's cruelty." And then she touched the woman, and the woman started to change. And the old woman, she just disappeared. And the King never saw her again. But they say that he was a changed man, now that the mocker had been mocked. I have one more story for you, and this is one of my favourites. Once upon a time there was a king, and this king, he had a daughter. The Queen had died in childbirth, and the king was left to raise his daughter by himself, well, with all the usual palace people. The only problem was that the king really spoilt his daughter, and from a very early age she ruled the roost. Whatever she wanted, she got, and I mean anything, all the way through her life. If she wanted chocolate, she got chocolate. If she wanted entertainment, she was given entertainment. If she wanted the biggest jewels in the world, the king would send out for the biggest jewels in the world. If she wanted a frog with pink and purple spots and wearing a crown, she would have had it. Now, the princess got to a certain age, an age where girls like to look in the mirror, and she was very pretty, and she had the most beautiful hair, a head of gold hair with silver and gold highlights in it, and it came out like this, all the way down to her hips. She loved it, but She really wanted it to grow a bit quicker than it did. It seemed to take forever. So she decided that she would ask her father to sort it. So one day she went to him and she said, Daddy, I'd really like it if you could somehow make my hair touch the floor. And he said, oh, daughter, you know how much I love you. You know how much I care. But really, I would get you anything, but I can't do that. And she said, well, if you can't do it, then I'm never, ever going to speak to you again. And she turned on her heel and ran up the stairs, the king running after her. And she got up there and she slammed the door in true teenage fashion and locked it. The king pounded on the door and he said, daughter, you're being unreasonable. Please. Nothing. She said, go away. I'm never going to speak to you again until you've done it. Well, that king, you've got to feel a bit sorry for him, haven't you? He did what kings usually do in this situation. Sent out a royal proclamation. Anybody in the land, anybody in the world who could make his daughter's hair grow. Well, they came. To begin with, they came, and there was always a big queue. They came with potions and lotions and spells and strange stretching contraptions. Nothing worked, and his daughter, true to her word, did not speak a word to him. And the poor old king, he sat there of an evening lonely in the throne room, beside himself as to what he could do. Well, it was a particularly wild and windy night, as is oft the way, when there was a pounding of a stick on the door. One of the servants went down and opened the door just a little crack, and there standing, well, was a figure who lifted her head, and he could see that there was an old woman. What do you want? She said, let me in. I need to see the king. It's late. The king won't want to see you. Oh, I think he will. I have something that might help him with his daughter. Well, on hearing this, the servant opened the door. Come in, come in. And in she walked, with a stick in one hand. She used the stick, and as she walked down the corridor, she left a trail of water as it dripped off her cloak. As he closer looked, he saw that she was indeed very, very old. Her skin hung in wrinkles across her cheeks and down over her mouth. The single tooth sat at the front at an awkward angle, and he could see that her eyes, one went that way and one went that way. And her nose, well, she had a nose. But as she walked down towards the throne room, the doors were open to her, and the king could hear her coming. And when she stood before him, yes, what can I do for you? She said, it is not what you can do for me, but what I can do for you. Pray tell me what? And she said, I have something that will help you with your problem with your daughter. And she opened her cloak like this, and from it she took out a mirror. And she said, this is a magic mirror. Tell your daughter to be very, very careful what she does with it. He said, I will. Will it work? Yes, but she must take care. The king took it and said, what can I give you? Nothing, she said. She turned on her heel and went back through the doors. Well, the king wasted no time. He ran all the way up the stairs and he pounded on his daughter's door and he said, "Daughter, daughter, open the door. I have something that is going to work." And the daughter, she opened the door and he said, "Look." And she said, "Oh, thank you." Bang! She shut the door in his face. He said, "Daughter, be careful. Be careful how you use it. Don't talk to me about that. I know how to use a magic mirror." And then the king waited. And inside, the girl, she held it up. Oh, and she looked at herself in this mirror and she just knew that this time, this was going to work. "Now, where shall I hang it?" She thought. Mirror, mirror on the wall. No, that one's been done. Mirror, mirror on the bed. No. Mirror, mirror on the door. And she hung it on the back of the door. She looked in that mirror. And she was so excited. She could feel the mounting in her as... And just imagine what she was going to look like. And she said the magic words, "Mirror, mirror on the door, make my hair touch the floor." There was a heavy silence, and then there was a gentle tinkling and a puff of blue smoke, and her legs fell off. Thank you. I love that story. I hope that you have enjoyed my storytelling. I am Suzanne Arnold, or Suzanne the Storyweaver, here at the World Storytelling Cafe. I think there's a hat down there somewhere. If you want to throw some coins in, they would always be welcome. But so is your company. So I hope to see you again sometime. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and farewell. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just been listening to the most magnificent storyteller, and just like if you come into a pub or a bar, if you happen to be in America, and there's no door charge, but there's a tip jar or there's a hat, we'd really appreciate it. Because our tellers, they've got no way to earn at the moment. We'd really appreciate it if you could reach into your pocket and you could drop a little something into the hat. Thank you. And to do that, you have to go to the website, World Storytelling Cafe.